Hello, hello.
Hello,
Hello.
how are you?
Doing all right. How about everybody else? That good, Betsy. I see the enthusiasm in that thumb. Hey, Cindy.
Hello. Oh,
Howdy.
really high tonight here.
Oh, yeah. Hello, Carmen. Hello, everybody else that's joining in.
Hello.
Sorry, I was a minute or two behind schedule getting going. I've been cleaning the studio like mad.
It's actually
You can see me?
I can see you, Carmen.
Okay, because I can't see myself.
Oh, here, let me spotlight you then. Oh, almost. I guess I can't spotlight you when you're not showing.
Oh, that's weird. Ah, I had Zoom meetings all day today. I'm
Oh.
fried. So I feel like how you feel when you say you just got here from work.
Yep. Sometimes it's a bit much. Well, I don't know, we're going to get a terribly much bigger crowd than this today, but welcome to all who are here. And let me get my chat open so that I can see that alongside. There we go. I am spotlit. I'm in the wrong screen though, so let me go up to my big screen so I can see all your faces. There we go. So in the new year, we've got a bunch of stuff coming up. The usual codicil at the beginning of this. I am not John Cogswell. I will never be John Cogswell. I'm not sure I'd even want to be John Cogswell, but I wouldn't mind having the skill with my hands that he has. Because I don't think I could live up to the years that he's got of experience. I think John has gone about his learning a very different way than I have. And if you do ever get a chance to meet him in person, if you haven't already, his stories about his practice evolution are pretty wonderful. Today we are, what are we doing? We are doing the setting of the previous week's conclusion of the cut card setting, which some of you have been sending me your in progress, and I'm very excited for the show and tell portion at the end of the show because there's some cool stuff going on out there. We're going to also build and hopefully solder the multi-jig setup for some basic repeatable prong settings. And then we will be sizing and handling one of our gravers. And if you are going to be playing along at home on that one, I recommend that you do your number 52 first, which is the round, because we're going to use that right out of the gate. We will use all three that he recommends, the 42, the 52, and the, what is the other? The onglet is, I think, a 4 that he recommends. Although anything close to those sizes should work for these. And that's all chapter 5 settings, but the first few start with the round. So that's the first one I'm going to handle set. What else? My class registration is up, and you have another 2 weeks, give or take, a little bit more than that, to use the code that I will put in the chat to get your 15% off for any of the virtual classes. If you use that at my website and put up all the registration stuff. There's the usual links for the Facebook group for going up to my workshops if you want to register. And that does not include a discount on the waxworking class, which is a live one. No digital feed on that one. That's local to Portland. If you want to join in, there are still spots. Holoforms is the first up in May. Bezels Less Ordinary is coming in September, end of September, beginning of October. And then clasps from simple to structural is in November. I don't know if I'll be adding any other workshops in. I'm trying to see what the year looks like overall with workshops. And so, I mean, with shows and things like that, but I will let you know. As always, the Rio for Schools code, which you do have to re-up every 6 months if you don't have another teacher keeping you current, is, come here, where's my little chat? There we go. That is the Rio for Schools code, if it will post for you guys. So if you don't have that down, you may want to add it. And even if you do have another teacher down, you're also able to add mine into the mix. Any questions before we get started on today's work, gang? Yes, Carmen.
I was trying to do the cone setting, and I was wondering, like, does the gem have to be like that, or can it be like this?
Hang on a sec. I'm trying to get you spotlit and Zoom is not behaving.
I don't see myself. Okay, now
So
I
what are
see
you trying to,
myself.
you're trying to do which setting?
I was trying to do that.
The
Cone
conical,
setting.
yeah, so, yep,
Can you see it? This one.
yep.
And I was using this stone.
Which, is it a perfectly round stone? It's just got a little bit more belly and table matching than usual?
No, you can't see it. It's not, it's like that. Can you see
So
it?
it's got a little bit of a pooch out on the belly of the stone, which may make it more challenging to get your angle. So it means you're gonna have to not do as steep an angle probably, because otherwise it'll hit the sides. But as long as it's round, a conic form should.
Because you see, this is what I tried to do and I couldn't do it.
So it may be that it's bumping out a little bit too far on the sides, the stone. And it also looks like you may be a little shallow. That seems like it looks like you're going to the edge of the stone and you need to be below that point.
Oh, here?
Nope, not
Oh,
that far, but a little further down. There's proportions that he lays out. So what you're doing is you're making the total height of what you want the piece to be, and your lower curve needs to follow it. It also appears that your two curves in that drawing are not parallel to one. They're not following each other. It looks like they're kind of wonky.
I don't know how to use the compass either, is my problem.
So that's the tough part for me. You guys have seen me struggle with it. But it's about what you're using. You're using the important part of the very bottom of your drawing, that point at the very bottom, is that's where one point of your dividers goes all the time for both curves.
Because I found this in a magazine. And I guess, does it have to be like that or no?
I would not put it that close to the coulette of the stone. That seems a little bit too close to the stone to give you any leeway for when you adjust your setting. I would go a little bit short of that. I mean, a little bit longer than that, but more important is your curves. In your drawing, your curves don't follow each other. One goes up a little bit and one goes down a little bit. So it's, see how the left side is narrower than the right side of the curves?
Right here.
Yeah,
Okay.
those should be following each other all the way around. Because if you think about it, the two sides of our cone, when they get put together, have to line up and be the same size. So you need, your band is not I think your bottom line looks out of sync to me, but I can't quite tell over the camera.
Yeah. I just tried, got all the measurements. I did
Yeah,
that.
I
And I'm
think
like, well, maybe the stone. I thought it was maybe because it wasn't like a perfect, like that.
that stone is going to make it a little hard to do a steep angle. So maybe try a little bit less of an angle the next time you draw it, but go back and look at your directions and figure out. So both of your curves that you're drawing, that bottom point of the drawing, it's not important to the metal. It's important to laying the material out on the page.
Okay.
So I think start again at the drawing stage and I think you'll get there.
Yeah, because I think I got graph paper that is going to be even more.
Help you line it up.
tighter.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
line it up more. Okay, so I don't have to have that kind of stone. I could do it with the stone I have.
Yeah, so we're going to use some stones for the multi-jig today that are just perfectly made manufactured CZs. They're great for practicing. They're great for practicing the conical stuff. The crown settings are easier with a perfectly fitted stone, because then if you need to, you can do computerized mapping of the drawing you want. I don't know if you remember, but I gave you guys that link to the magical site of all the measuring devices.
Yeah.
That'll get you some of your conical work. If you don't, or if you're having trouble with the drawings, and then at the very least, you could use it as a guide for how your curves should follow one another. So when in doubt, I'm going to show you a couple things I'm modifying on John's jig model, just because I'm finding it's not working perfectly for me the way he's got it described. Hopefully it won't be an undersized, oversized thing like I did on the emerald cut, but it'll be I'm finding it's hard to keep my wires in place the way I want to. So I've got a minor mod that I do to it. So take what you learn and run with it in different directions if that's what you need. It's great that you were researching in another source for how they did the drawing. So go for it. Any other questions before we get going, or any other folks that are new to us saying hi for the first time? Anyone? Okay, then let's get to it. So I don't think I've added anything to the magical board yet. After we put the rest of the settings from this in, I'll bring the board of stone settings out. Oops, my cameras are in the reversed order. Hang on a sec. And you're gonna have to bear with me a little bit, gang. I reorganized my studio because I had the electricity rewired a bit that last week. And so I'm playing with a slightly different layout. You'll see that my soldering station is more tucked away in the corner than it was. So it may take me a moment longer to get switched cameras because I'm going back and forth around the studio a little bit. So this is the card setting that we did last time. Whoops, with the stone not yet set, because that's what we're doing today. All I did between sessions was a little bit of sand and polish to clean it up. Made sure I like to blunt everything, because remember we were doing these with files and burrs to cut in a little bit. So it got a little rough around the edges. So I wanted to blunt it. I put it on a Tripoli wheel and polished it very carefully, because this wants to catch the wheels a lot when you go with the wheel. And what I've realized is I have not made a model that is enough to show what he does on, we are on page 122 in the book, roughly. We've done one that has a fairly delicate prong at the top. If I had done much wider, like if I had gone straight up, then we would take the exercise that he shows on the right, on the images on the right side of 122, where we would be slicing down a small little slice very carefully with a fine saw blade. I think he asks, does he just say, 6/0 or 8/0 he recommends. And we just be slicing in half or a little segment off of it to make the prong. Again, you only need to do that if the prongs are wide enough to make a difference that you can't easily push them down. These are so narrow that I probably can, but just to draw that writ large, if our stone is coming over like this, and we've got something big and funky here, we're going to do a very, very careful slice here with the intent of then putting something into the slot and angling it over. And what you'll see in that set of drawings is that we don't push it all the way over at first. We push it over enough to make it start to position it, and we do that from all sides, just like that. And then we're trimming back the way that we would any other prong, whether it's flat filing it and bright cutting it a little bit, whether it's putting a curve at the top of it, whatever you want for that impacting visual, that's still the part that's holding the stone on. So we can do any number of things. And then visually from the top, we have, see if I can draw this three-dimensionally at this point. I think I've done a bad starting angle for that. So we'd have something lumped up over here, and then we'd see on the far side, we'd see that bit coming down, and we'd have one over here that comes out this way, right? And whatever decorative elements we put into this to make it look the way we wanted. So again, you just need to take a small slice off, but not off, you're just cutting down to basically where the stone meets the setting. Or if we were doing a faceted stone, it would be right at that top of the, just above the, at the girdle line, just above the girdle line. So I don't have enough material to do that, to do that. So mine is a fairly straightforward setting at this point. The heavy lift for us, as I said last time on this setting, is really in all of the precision cutting and filing that we do. So any number of our pusher tools would work, but I'm going to actually find my prong setting pusher, if I can figure out where it is on my rack. There we go. Just because this is so close to prong-like that I want something that's going to not slide off of it. So this is one that has the little notch at the top. You can buy these or you can make them. Again, if you buy them, remember to blunt them a little bit because you still don't want sharp and scratchy. And I just want to push in and over, same as I would anything else. It's just I'm going a little bit more counter to the metal than I would if it were a round prong, because the sheet is going to fight me down below. So it's going to be a little bit harder to push it in, but I'm going to either side first. And then I'm going to the other side. Oops, and I got to do a little straightening because I realize that I'm not staying in position the way that I want to. So it's okay to take a pair of flat pliers, and this one's a little off center to begin with. Get that straight up and down. Make sure that your stone isn't lifting off as you do this, that it's staying in line, that you expect it the way you expect it to. So again, doing that first pass on the two sides, that's a little too hard of a push. Where'd my stone go? Yikes, I really mangled that one. See what I can do to correct it. And figure out where my stone got flung.
Miss Rachel,
Yes.
have you soldered it together?
Yeah, we soldered it last session.
Okay, I forgot.
That was
Okay.
that's it takes a whole lot to prep for it, but then if you've got it all cut right, it's one quick solder and you're done. So it's one of the nicer things about it. Once you get past the frustration of meticulously laying it out and filing everything, then it's boom, 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 you're soldered. Okay, where did my stone go? I heard it go flying. It's bright pink, should be hard to miss. This is kind of frustrating if I can't find the stone. Oh, it went into one of the drawers. There we are. Okay, maybe a little tricky to get it back in because I had several of the prongs already pushed down. So it was just the force of that push that I did on the second to last prong that gave me the trouble. And I'm gonna have to pull some of these open a little bit. Goodness, someone wax, that'll help. Okay, let's see about positioning these a little bit better again. Did a little bit of mangling in the course of all of that. Straighten things out. And let's see, where's the one that didn't get any action? I may be wrong. I may have enough material that I need to actually do that slice, but I want to see because several of them have gone over quite smoothly. And it's just one that's fighting the pushover. So again, I'm using an in and up lift as I do this, and I'm sitting about here, right where the top of the curve is of the stone, right where it starts to curve in. So it's getting there. It's not fully notched in. One side is a little better than the rest. I think this one needs a little more top push. And if you're using a fragile stone, definitely try the slice method if you can, because you don't want to, this is a lot more material that we're pushing over than we would if we were using a more traditional prong. I'm going to see about using a brass pusher for the top portion, just to see if I can get a little different traction. It's not quite hitting the top the way I want it to. Straighten as I go. So what I'm feeling for when I'm moving it around, I'm trying to see if it's lifting at all, and it is still lifting a little bit. Not surprising, because I've got two sides that just aren't quite down over the curve as much as I would like. So, better. Okay. It's fitting in there nicely. That is not coming out. So what I've got, no, I've got one corner that's working really well. I think the opposite corner needs a little more push over. What I'm looking at is how well does it follow the curvature of the stone? And some of that can be, you can modify, if you're going to leave it as a whole prong, you could put a little bit more curve into your filing inside so that it has some line that follows the stone. If you don't get these in close, they're going to be even more catchy. This is already a setting that's going to want to catch on sweaters and things like that because it's very pokey. But the closer in you can get the fit, the better. Any minor tweaks that you need to make. Making sure that they're still opposite each other. And for me, I'm going to clean up this piece a little bit. I've been using the wax to hold the stone in. It feels like it's up a little bit on one side over the other. So if I can push this one corner down a little more, I think it'll be equaled out. Much better. And then I would probably I'd pull out my my favorite, that Swifty wheel that I've talked a lot about that I really love, which is the rubberized wheel. You can get it at Contenti. And I just do a little buff up. Oops, except it's got to be tightened down a little bit more than that before it's going to do its thing. So I'm just going to polish up the prongs a little bit. And one of the reasons I like the Swifty is that it, except for very, very soft stones, I don't ever worry about it being right at the stone. It's not going to harm them. But you can see it does a nice quick brightening. I can even do it inside the little bits, although they shred when you do that. I just really like how it nicely smooths down the ends of the prongs for me. Turn around. And so, nice, simple little visually impactful setting. Looks interesting from the sides, looks interesting from the top. You could chain a bunch of these together. They've got a nice stability to them because they've got that footer to them. So they could probably be, you know, strung between several of them with maybe not jump ring, maybe jump rings would do it if you put the jump rings in the right position so it doesn't want to flip over. It certainly can be a little pendant on its own or an additive to something. Really nice little setting. And again, once you get the hang of these, the possibilities are endless. Like do a 3-way prong so that you get 6 visually impactful prongs. Do an 8-way when you're comfortable with it. The challenge in more prong versions is that you end up having to cut instead of, remember we already said that the trickiest part of this is getting that slot cut so it's just wide enough for the slot. But when you're having to do a 6, your angle changes, right? So you have to cut diagonally through it and make the slots fit. And then you have to jigsaw the whole set together. So just do it in stages and work your way up. And then John, of course, has to challenge us with his drawings and show us the one that's the little ship that is like one long panel down the middle and two shorter ones. So if I were doing a 6-pronged or 3-sheet one, I would probably give myself extra material and do a fold. So I've got, I've got a whole stack that I'm cutting at once to shape everything, but you can't quite do that when you've got 1 long and 2 short. So in that case, I'd probably do the 2 as a fold, the 2 short pieces as a fold, and then 1 long piece as a standalone measured out. And the hard part on that one will be getting your positioning of where you slot things along the side. Questions about that one? It's a fun setting. It's a pain in the butt for measurement and for sawing and filing, but it's a lot of fun. And I posted up on the Facebook group one of the earliest recollections I have of seeing a really fancy one of these, which was a cover piece that Nans Alland did, where she turned it into a whole sculptural thing, because we're working small for just setting, but nothing says that the setting can't be part of a larger ornamentation. In fact, these are great for large scale for Christmas tree ornaments if you want to go that route, getting the slotting together and making some dimensional pieces.
Mhm.
Anything on that one?
So you ended up not going in there to cut it and move it over. You just used the original.
I did use the prongs as I'd filed them. Why is this so dark? Hang on a second. I'm just going to try and brighten this screen. Maybe it's as bright as it's getting. So I did, in this case, my prongs were small enough that I didn't need to slice in. This one is sort of on the border. Oh, I'm not on the right camera. Hang on. This one is sort of borderline. And because it's going up a taller curve, I think maybe I'd need to try cutting these in, like split them halfway. I'd probably get a fine Sharpie. I'd probably try to slice about there. The truth of it is this is such a snug fit that I could get away with just pushing these up, but it'll be a longer term solution if I actually trim, saw down. And again, use your absolute finest saw blade to cut down those slices. And then some kind of lever device. So something that I have for fold form pulls and for the flat of the fold that I put in for a box clasp and so on is a cheapo steel kitchen knife that I've filed down and thinned and blunted. So it's not actually super sharp anymore. That's the kind of thing that if you don't have anything more precise, you put it into your split and you can use it as a wedge to push over. But remember, early in the book, for those of you that have been with me from the very outset, John had us make some pushers out of knives. The other thing he describes in the book is just putting one that has only a single angle to it instead of making it something that's steeper. So you're just going to grind down, where's my proper pen for this board. You just grind down a nail or something into a wedge, a thin wedge, and blunt it and polish it so that it's not sharp and grubby, and use that, and it becomes the fulcrum. So you stick that in between the parts of your prong towards the stone and lift, pushing this upwards, pushes this downwards. Right? So that was his other suggestion. If you don't already have something, you could also potentially hammer out and forge a piece of brass, or I think I got this maybe from Lion Punch Forge. I'm not sure. Just a wedge tool, which is just a pounded out, flattened and polished piece of steel. Needs a little polishing up better on the edge because I managed to get it a little gunked up. But so lots of those kinds of choices, as long as they're small enough to get in and not distort things, tuck and lift. Any other questions on this setting?
That piece
Okay.
reminds me, of like a rocket ship.
Yeah,
NASA.
yeah, this one especially, it looks like the 1950s
Really cool.
science fiction collection rocket ships. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's really cool.
This one less so, and the pink is pretty cool. Like the pink really pops. I like that. It's one of the colors that I think is really hard to come by, except if you get a manufactured stone or a really well color treated one that I'm not going to spend the money for. But yeah, I like that setting. Okay, gang, next up is the multi-setting jig, and this is what we're making today. And the theory behind this is that it's going to make a set of the exact same size prong settings, prong / tube settings. So what we're doing is we're doing prongs on the outside of a tube, which we did a little bit of that when we played around with the variation, where we had done a step bezel and we added some prongs to the outside of it. But this is a shortcut for lots of small ones. There's a couple big downsides to this that the time savings may or may not make up. The big downside is you have to make one of these jigs for every size that you want to do, and for every prong combination. So if you're perfectly happy doing nothing but 4 prongs, you're in great shape because you just make your 4 prong for whatever size tubing you want. But if you also want to do some 6 prong settings, you're going to have a separate jig that you make up for each of them. And there's a little bit of pain goes into making the jigs. This setting, John is recommending 18 gauge prongs for larger stones and going down to as low as 20 for very small stones. He doesn't tell us in the book what he considers large and small. So I'm using the 18 gauge just as a guesstimate on an 8 or 10 millimeter stones. I think he said, what are these? These are, oh, these may only be 6 millimeter stones. But still, I'm giving myself the benefit of it. And the other thing is that you need to have heavy wall tubing appropriate to your stones. So one of the nice things about the calibrated stones when you're getting manufactured, the CZs, is that they come really well calibrated. Every dimension is going to be the same. So I just buy sets of them in funky bright colors for practice settings. This is in fact what I use when I teach the live version of some of these settings, is I have these on hand for students to play with because they're cheap and you break one, no big deal. And there's a perfect match to it. So the setting that you're making, if it fit before, will fit after you crack one in the next stone you put in. But the heavy wall tubing is becoming harder and harder to find in a variety of sizes. You kind of have to shop between distributors to get the range. It used to be that there was a whole slew of companies that would make especially nested tubing, which is, as we learned in one of our earlier settings, I think chapter 2, you can make straight up, just make a setting by putting nested tubes together and soldering them. So this version instead is going to have prongs. It can be used for faceted stone, for cabochons, but he really designs it more for the faceted set. So that if it were for a cab, your cab would need to sit pretty solidly on top of the tube in order for it to work. With the faceted settings, he describes it as either being sitting right on top of it, or just a little inside of it, which is what my sizing is here. And then when it fits the way that it does here, we're going to have to do a little bit of a cut in with setting burrs, the way we would on other types of settings, the way we might on a heavy wall. We did the drill in on the heavy wall tubing step bezels that we did. So in this case, I'm figuring I'm going to have to bring in a big honkin' setting burr to just put a little bit more of a seat in it. Or if you're really good with a file, I just find it's a little tricky to do on a small round object to get that inside seat filed well. But either way, we're going to set our prongs on 4 sides of it. And we want to be able to make batches of them at a time. So we're going to just string a whole boatload together in between the 2 plates that we make. So let me show you one that I set up that has my variation on it. And this is another one of those, the important first step is to make sure that you have 2 really square, really same sized pieces of a heavy gauge brass. So I had some, what is this, 16 gauge or something? Yeah, I think this is 16 gauge brass, something heavy and stiff. And the modification that I have found useful is on at least one end, I soldered on a little chunk of tube. It doesn't have to be as tall as I put here, but what I was finding, the frustrating part that you'll see when we go to attach them together, because I'll show you before I put on a tube. What I found is that they want to torque, the wires want to torque and twist. And so having one run just be like brushing up against a piece of tubing has kept them pointing more straight towards the other piece, and just gave a little bit more stability to it. I haven't bothered to do it on both ends, but it wouldn't hurt probably. You just need to make sure that you're leaving enough room between each of the settings, and remember that this one doesn't come off in the end. So I just put a little hard solder down on that. So because we all know how much I love just sitting here and filing on screen, I'm not torturing you with that. I made a couple of squares before we started, just to get them really squared up. And so we are on page 123. And about halfway down, he describes using 18 gauge or 20 gauge, depending on the size of it. He says we can use either brass or nickel silver. And he didn't give a scale of the tubing he was using, but he says he's generally doing 10 to 12 millimeters on a side for the square. I based it on giving myself a little bit of extra room outside of the size of the tubing that I'm using. Okay. So when they are nice and square, our next step is to get the center point. So I'm just going to crosshatch scribe across the diagonal on both edges. I'm going to try and do this on a flatter surface than that, though. Sorry if my head is blocking. So I'm just finding center point.
Rachel, you said your little piece of brass is 10 to 12. What is yours exactly? Can you do that?
I am at, oh gosh, I want millimeters, not inches. Mine is, in this case, it looks like 14 millimeters, because I'm using a slightly bigger tube than I did on the little one. I did, looks like I did 13 on this one, so it's not much smaller. So I was basing it on giving myself enough so I didn't want it so small that I couldn't handle it, because the hard part for me is getting the little wires run, and so I wanted enough grip to it. As long as it's perfectly square, we're in good shape. That's the key.
So the book said extruded seamless tubing. What exactly is that?
So heavy walled tubing, when you buy it from the manufacturer, is squeezed out. Did you ever have either one of those Italian cookie squeezers, or like, if you've ever done pottery, they have extruders for that. It's literally pushing the metal out so it doesn't have a seam anywhere. That's a good question though. If you don't have the walled tubing you want, or if you have walled tubing and it's a little too big, you can pull it through draw plates and make your own tubing out of sheet, or you can make the tubing that you have thinner or smaller diameter, I should say. It's going to actually get thicker walled when you do that. It wastes a fair chunk of the metal because you have to squeeze down the front edge of it and pull it through. But if you've never made your own tubing, it's one of the most annoying and also satisfying exercises in making jewelry art, because it means that you are able to make whatever size tubing you need for your job at hand. And the downside of it is that when you make it yourself, it's seamed. And the seam line is always harder than the rest of the silver around it, which makes it much more hard to manage when you want to do something to it. So John recommends that if you're making a seamed walled tubing, that you're putting the seam along one of your prong lines so that it's kind of half hidden by the prong itself. Same as we did when we were trying to put the seams on our basket settings, right? That's not, making tubing is not something we will do in the John Cogswell stuff, but if there's time in my clasps class, I might be able to show it. You need not a lot of equipment for it. Technically, you can do it on a sturdy bench with a draw plate and a vise and a pair of good grips. But the more you do it, the more you're going to want an actual machine that helps with it, which it's called a draw bench, and it has a little winch system that John actually gave me directions if anybody wants to make their own, because it's really just parts from the hardware store that you put along a long bench, and he said that I can hand those out to people who are interested in it, so I can pop that up. Maybe I'll put it on the Facebook. No, he's okay with me sending it. I'm not sure he's okay with me posting it publicly, but we'll see. Okay, so I've now made my cross hatches, and just so that I can get a good clear point, I'm going to make my center here and here. And my prongs are, because I'm doing, in this case, 4, although I could technically do them off center, my prongs are going to be out on these lines that I've scribed, right? That's where I'm headed. But I'm going to put a center point in right at the mark. I'm just using my punch to mark the center. And my big struggle with this, I think I made 3 or 4 sets before I got my precision where I wanted it. My challenge is getting everything centered and getting the holes just outside of where I want them. So part of the trick is doing it in stages. And part of what I've come up with is I made myself some circles on labels so that I can really know roughly where I'm hitting with the size of the circle and not be inside of it. I just have to line up my 2 center points. Come on. Okay, that gives me a ballpark of where I need to be outside of. But you can do these by tracing a circle. If you, in fact, let me do one each way, because the stickers is a new thing for me that I'm trying, because you guys know how much I hate measuring if I don't have to. But the other thing that I would do would be to take a circle template that has the marks and make sure that I'm centering myself. I find this a little more challenging because then I might be off a little one way or the other.
Move
And
your
then-
head a bit, Rachel.
Sorry,
Move your head just a bit.
my head is completely out of the way now.
Yeah, thank you.
It's taking its time catching up, I guess. So I can find the size of my tubing, the outer diameter size, and line up. And then I can do my circle in here to give myself the guidance. But this is where I started to get a little out of line from where I wanted. The challenge is you need to be just outside, but not too far outside your wall. So you don't want a gap between your tube and your wall. The hole that you're drilling needs to be right at the outside of the circle that you've created, right? Or out of the tube diameter. So I'm going to be drilling here, 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 and here on my lines. Let me see how that fits with my. Yeah, the sticker's not gonna, unless I get an exact match on my sticker, I realize it's not gonna help me much. I'd have to have the right scale for the tube that I'm on. And that's gonna make it more challenging. So we'll give up on the sticker idea. And go back to the template that I know I can match. So again, what I'm looking for is lining up with the right size tubing and then getting my lines to follow the ones I've already marked down in all directions. Yeah, and that feels off center to me. I'm not liking that. I'm gonna wipe that. Try that marking up again. There we go. That makes me happier. And then checking that my tube is really on those lines. Just outside it. And just because I've gotten stuck with this, I'm checking with my tube in place to make sure that I really am just outside the walls. Because if I go inside the walls, a little bit clearer mark. If I go inside those walls at all, I'm going to have trouble because the wire is not going to run past things. It's going to warp as it goes past. So I've now got it laid out and I'm going to punch first. And I got to remember, I think John said to do 2 of them and check your position, but I may be mixing up another setup. Let me see.
10 to 12 millimeters.
Oh, and he uses a set of dividers, but I have a harder time scoring the dividers than using this measuring device that's already set to the circle size I have. If I didn't have a perfect match to my tubing, I would probably try the dividers. Range plate, does he do the separate ones? I'm just double checking. No. Okay, so he's doing them all at once, so let me punch all of them. And the important part of the bits that you use is that they be ever so slightly smaller than your wire. Here's my wire. I straightened some wire before we started this thing too. So I straightened some 18 gauge wire. And I'm looking for a burr that is that size. Hang on while I check my handy chart of what dimensions the 18 gauge is. 18 gauge gets me 1.02 millimeters. And so I want a burr that's close to that, but just shy of it. I have an exact 1.02. I'm going to go one size down from the 1.02. By the way, if you haven't seen, I think it's Auto Fry has the version of the saw blade holder that same folks bought I think this is the Kerf company. Oh, nope, it's Nashef Designs. Is that the same guys? Yeah, it is. Nashef Designs. They have a set of these that is all the sizes filled in for you already. And it's like 99 bucks or something crazy like that. So I could not say no, because man, do I have trouble keeping my burrs in order. Okay, another thing, when you are using especially delicate burrs, snap off the last ½ inch or 3/4 of an inch of the end, obviously not the drilling end, but the more that you leave sticking out, the more wobble you introduce into your drilling process. So the best way to do that is to put it in a vise, ideally with your with a protective thing there in there, but I can't find mine since I reorganized. So I'm going to just put a towel in place to hold it in place down in the jaw protectors. I don't know where mine are. And I'm just going to put it down a ways and snug it in, but not so snug that I do damage to the bit. So I just want it to be held firmly. This is the part I'm going to take off. If it's a bigger bit than this, you can use a cutting disc of some kind and slice it off. But when it's this small, literally just take your hammer, a good basic hammer, ball peen, ideally, something like that. If I can get mine out today. And you're just going across and hitting it off. Just figure out where the steel goes so it doesn't land in your pickle.
How much did you hit off?
I took roughly 3/4 of an inch. I took off about 15 millimeters, but it's going to depend on which bit you're on. What I'm doing is leaving myself just a smidge of holding material on the end of the burr. I'll show you what it looks like finished. So I just left enough to hold it by. And if it's really rough, you can do a little filing. Just don't get the steel shavings in your thing, in your silver dust. I just want it to be small enough that when it's in being held, which this is I'm gonna have to switch to my other black shaft and swap it out. I just don't want it extending out as far when it's a thin, small bit. Obviously, sometimes you need a long, tiny bit because you're trying to get deep into, say, a vessel or something. But it's more likely to snap your burr, snap your drill bit if it's longer. And this gives me more control over how much I have sticking out. Need that much. And I'll always be drilling on top of something wood. Oops, gotta do the one that I've actually punched though. And for life. let the burr do the work. I always want to force it down, and I go through burrs way faster than I should as a result. I also always forget that it's a lot harder to drill through brass than it is through silver. So I'm like, why isn't it doing anything? And it's because I'm drilling through brass instead of through silver. If it's a very small piece and you're having trouble holding it down, put it in some plastic or, you know, the setting material, jet set or something like that. If it's getting too hot, quench it in some water. Take off the burrs that are on the back so that they're not in your way. It does not look like it's very squared up. Oh, that's going to be a challenge. And I like to check and see that I am in fact drilled outside the edge of the material. It's a little bit of a squeak, but it's there. And then if that drill bit is just undersized, you may have to open these up a little bit, but what we're going for is something that's a little challenging to get the material through. This is pretty much perfect in the amount of tension I had to put in there. Because if you make the holes too big, they're just going to slide around and not help you hold your material in place. So in this case, I used 18 gauge and my bit was, what did I say, a 0.99 or a number 61 bit.
0.99.
Always remember that, especially if you're going from a big manufacturer that's doing lots of bulk production, your wire may vary ever so slightly from what it's supposed to be, based on its gauge. So just use it, do a check of your actual gauge relative to it if you can. And let's do the other one. And then I'll show you the wobbly that happens and why I decided to start putting at least one side's wire down. Where did I put my punch? Oh. You'll see me lifting out halfway through the drill down. That's to let the material that's coiling up the bit come back out, so it doesn't clog up for the rest of the drill. Just getting the little bits out. Bit, I'm gonna loosen up. What did I do? Can I just see how that tubing looks? Oh, I'm gonna deburr it first, so it's not catching on this side. Okay, and we're looking pretty good. Right, so I'm going to show you when we put it together with just the, without the extra support, you'll see what I mean about the torquing. So straighten out your wire before you do this, and then cut 4 equal length pieces. Doesn't have to be perfect because we're losing a bit of the scrap at either end no matter what we do. Again, I'm using 18 gauge right now. And then we're just pushing them through. Just a bit to hold them. And you put 3 in together. If you need to open up the hole a little bit, what you can do is take a solid punch of some kind and just do a tiny little bit of squiggling back and forth on either side. So I'm just using it to burnish the hole. But again, only do that if it's really, really snug and hard to push through. Just clean it up a little. Put that back through. Some of these holes seem a little tighter than others. There we go.
So your wire is sterling silver, but your base is brass.
Yes, and the base is not getting attached to anything. We're going to reuse it over and over again, or rather it's not part of any of the settings, I should say. We may attach the little bit of tubing that I was talking about to make it a little easier to support. So it's, just think of it as a placeholder. All it's doing is building the frame that we're then going to put our tubing inside of. And rather than actually making this hole any wider, I'm going to just file, because it could be that my cut of my snipping of the end of it flattened the wire enough to make it a pain. So if you need to, just file down a smidge to get it to stick through. I'm looking to go right. It's from the same piece of wire and it's having a hard time getting through. Let me see if I did my holes differently. Yeah, maybe that hole is just much bigger than the others, even though it was the same burr. Maybe I do need to widen it a bit more. I realize I'm using brass on brass to try and do my widening. If you have steel to use steel burnisher. Steel burnisher. They're just enough to get stuck in there, but not enough to go as far as I'd like through the other side. If it's really, really being a pain, you can take the drill bit and sort of burr it out a little bit further. But this is so close to the size that I want to keep it nice and snug that I don't want to risk widening it too much. Say that, and then it's not playing nice. Maybe I will have to drill it out a little. So I'm staying with the same drill bit. Just wiggling it around a little bit as I drill through. There we go. It's a little bit too loose, but we'll live. Okay, so we're only putting in 3 spots at first. Leave that artifact and get these drilled out a little better, since they are already in good shape. Nope, they also need drilling out a little bit. All right, so then I'm putting those same 3 into 3 corners at the other end. Really hard to do while staying on camera. Nope, not drilled out enough, I guess. Aren't you glad I saved you from all the filing at the beginning? I have enough tediousness with just getting some holes punched.
It's good to see the process, though.
Good.
Real time helps you not get frustrated when you're trying
That's
to do
true.
it.
That's very true. I hadn't even thought about that. So make sure when you're putting them in the 3, you're putting them in the same quadrants as they belong, opposite each other. I'm just trying to get it positioned enough that I can push it through and trying not to bend the wire more than I already have. One of them being a pain in the butt still. Straighten out my wires again before I jam that in there. And this is where we start to hit that rotating thing that I found so frustrating on this. Come on, really? That's good. That's good. That's good. That's good. All right, so they should all come through. straighten this wire out a little bit more before I try to jam it back in. And it's kind of like playing pickup sticks in reverse. Getting them all connected where they need to go. Oh, I'm doing so well there for a minute. It's the fiddly bits that get you every time.
I think that's why he says, put a drop of what he calls cement on the tips.
On the tips of which did you say? What did I miss on them?
Let me read that again.
Oh, right, on page 124. Now carefully insert the ends of the 3 wires. I usually find it helpful, quick cement on each wire tip where it projects out from the plate. Ah, so he's probably gluing before he tries the second half. You're right.
Yeah,
Here, if I had any quick drying cement, which I do not.
well, I wonder what, maybe sticky wax.
Possibly. We can try some various other options. See what we got. Because the problem is, I don't know, it's a combination. Here, I'll use some of the sticky wax I've got right here. That's a good idea. If this does anything, keep it in place. Challenge is either thing has to eventually burn off. Yeah, that stabilizes a little. Nice call, Wendy. One hole is being a pain in the butt. Okay, so they start to want to spin. They start to want to twist on you. And we need to make sure that we unmangle whatever we've mangled on the way to lining them all up. So I'm just using my pliers to straighten a little bit better. So what I did before I got to you guys was I straightened the wire by pulling it in a vise until you feel it actually stretch, which gives it it work hardens it. Oops, came undone already. Should have snuck some wax on when I had them there. Okay, so we've got our set of 3 made into a little partially set up cage. And now we are going to set our properly sized tubing into the 3. And you'll see as soon as I have one down at the bottom, this is what made me want to solder something down. As soon as I have that, it guides the other points a lot better. But I'm going to try doing it without that solder down. If it gets too frustrating, we'll see where we go. Get the right corner. So I'm twisted. I put one in the wrong side. That's part of the reason I'm having trouble. You have to have them lined up across from each other, and I did diagonally instead of across. Here we go. Squeeze that little stuff back in there. Okay, so I'm making the little slotted channel there. Dear Lord, this is fiddly. And I'm setting up pieces along the run. And we can do batches at a time. We just have to leave enough between them that will represent the length of the prongs we want, plus a little for trimming. So we can make a whole slew of these. I'm going to actually, I didn't make that many tube cuts in preparation. I'm going to cut this down a bit. Oh my goodness, dropsy all over the place today. More controllable. So I'm creating a series of tubes along the run. This looks like about the right length to keep it under control. And tube go. So that I always have enough material to act as the connectors. I mean, act as the prongs once I cut these apart, because we're going to cut at the end on one side, leaving the prongs. So from here to, come back here, little guy. From here to here belongs to this setting. From here to here belongs to this setting, etc., etc. So you don't want them bumped all the way up against the ends. You need to leave enough. You can probably get away with, since I'm not putting one down to the actual plate, I can probably get away with more like this. And I could, if I had a fifth tube cut, I could pop it in there. I don't think I did a fifth. I think I only cut the 4 for now. So I'm getting that set up. And I'm putting my final prong in, which I'm going to trim down so that it's not as much of a fight. Go, get these set back up the way I want them. Little tweezers to get this back in place. All right, and now comes the magic that is binding wire. I think I mentioned in an earlier session that your binding wire should never be thicker than the material you're using it on, because it will contract at a different rate than the silver below it. I tend to prefer the iron binding wire to the steel binding wire. Let's see what I have in the right size though. And remember not to cut this stuff using your good pliers. You need snips that are devoted to getting rubbed up with steel. So I usually use whatever pair of snips has died in the course of its otherwise useful life. So I'm going to use this because that's thin enough. So John does not talk about making the wraps on it, and his drawing is a little different than what he teaches in person on making these little zip tie things. So I have a sneaking suspicion that on the far side of the picture that we see at the bottom of 124, there is a little squiggle in the metal. When we're working on like boxes or larger settings, he has us do what's called a zip tie, which let me actually do the zip tie so you can see it and in the context of it. This is like a half zip tie that he's put on his drawing here. But in a zip tie, like if you're doing a hollow form or something, I'm going to get this out of the way briefly. You're starting with a fairly good length of wire, and you're making a little fishy out of it, and you're twisting the fishy tail in place. Then you're twisting on the opposite direction. So I'm twisting, in the same direction. So that your one is, the right-hand side is always going away from you whenever you're twisting it. Let me see if I got that right. The right-hand side is always going away from you. So you're all twisting. You're all twisting. So whatever you have on the right, you're always knowing that this is tightening it because righty-tighty, lefty-loosey is what we're used to. And so you've made this little thing out of wire. This is much bigger than I need for our current project, which is why I'm showing you the large scale, and we're going to do the miniaturized version of it. And then whatever we're holding together, I'll put some things to hold together. I need to hold these pieces all in place. I'm threading through it. And then I can twist down until I get close, not with your fingers or with pliers. But the last thing that you do, once you've got this well tightened, to get a final snugness, is you're going to put a little zigzag in the top of it. So I've done a fair amount of tightening that would kind of hold it here. Like all of my sides are tightened, but my last step is to do this to really snug it up tight. And that little zigzag is the super critical, like this is the difference between you're going to hate on binding wire and you want to throw it across the room, and you're going to love binding wire, because I never learned the little zigzag until I met John, and my binding wire would constantly crunch into my material. This is like the little zigzags that you see in bridges that allow them to flex and expand in cold and hot kind of thing, expand and close. And what it means is, because the steel contracts differently than the materials below it, what it's doing is it's giving it room, if it needs to go, I'm going to loosen a little bit, right? So that little zigzag is the critical part. And I don't see that in his drawing, but he also didn't do a full twist. So what I'm going to bet is that we should put a tiny zig on one side of what's looping around. And I'm going to see if I can manage that. This is going to be you see me try it for the first time on camera. So I'm going to be doing not a full zig, but I'm going to use just one side to loop it in place. And we have to be careful not to compress our wires so that they don't, so they aren't positioned where we want them. We still want them at the 4 quadrants by the time we're done. And see if I can get this in close enough. Need the pliers for this. This is futsy. It's hard to get close enough to the material without distorting the wire positions around it. Oh, geez. Take one of these out and put it back in. So I'm not feeling particularly good about how that's holding. Let me see if I put a zigzag in one side, if it makes me feel any better. Why, it kind of does. Yeah. In fact, I think I'm going to put a zigzag on both sides. So again, I've still got to figure out how to not misalign my prongs. It's still not holding as much as I like. I feel like I need the next gauge down of binding wire than from what I have. Let me see if I have anything thinner. Woo. Not that. I can go to, I can move to the steel instead, and I can get thinner. Junky set. Enough thinner? No, it's the same gauge, isn't it? Shoot. Let me check one more place to see if I have really fine binding wire anywhere. Bear with me a moment, gang. I gotta go digging in the depths of the barrel of other stuff. Nope. Do not have it easily to hand. So we're either gonna be stuck with the binding wire we've got, or we don't use binding wire, and I think we're gonna try and stay with what we've got. So if you can get these positioned and straightened well, the challenge is making sure that they are truly in their four corners and not distorted inward by the binding wire. And I'm finding that I'm distorting these a fair amount more than I want to be. It wants to push away. But we'll see what we get with this. We have to do this for each one of them. Remembering to leave enough gap to be the prongs for the next one down in line. They do all four. Yeah, this really wants to distort the position of the softer silver wire. Ah, good mess. Squiggle.
How about crazy glue?
I abhor using things that are going to burn off while I'm at the bench. I'm already terrible about ventilation. But if that works for you, you go for it. Just please, please, please use really good ventilation and maybe even a face mask if you aren't already. Because crazy glue is ridiculously bad for you. The cyano, so it's cyanide in there, isn't it, or something like that? Cyanocyanate or something. Can't remember what exactly it's made of, but it's nasty for you. That, and if you are a fan of using whiteout for blocking things, please get the water-based whiteout instead of the generic, you know, the name brand, the regular formulaic whiteout. Wow, this is not holding as well as I would like it to by any stretch. So I'm going to say the little squiggly, the S-shaped squiggle, because it's not quite a Z-shaped in this smaller configuration, is critical to getting it tight at the end of the process that I'm going through here. But I need much, much thinner binding wire to be doing this well. because it really wants to reposition my prongs. I'm not enjoying this battle. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Dear God, help. Help, help, help. It's not doing what it should. This is a lot more battle than I want to put into something for just making a few settings at a time. Although plus side is that I think you can also do square. If you can get square tubing, heavy wall tubing, you can do square settings this way too. There might be some benefit to that.
I was going to say, you probably would have had all 4 of those
Soldered,
made by now.
right?
Yeah.
That's sort of what I'm feeling. It's a lot of work. If I got good enough and fast enough at it to maybe put like, 10 in a row, maybe it'd be worth it, but I'm not feeling the love. I actually feel like it was more sturdy without the binding wire, because I've had to mangle things so badly that I'm not confident that I'm square on. I think we're going to stick with 3 until we get a little better with this, better binding wire for this particular version.
I was going to suggest that.
Yeah, this is not happy making, but I want to get them straightened out before I do any soldering. In fact, I'm going to do 2 with the binding wire and 1 with no binding wire and see what my difference is. I think the binding wire is mostly, from his description, it's mostly to hold the little wires close to it, but they're holding it not well is the problem. Like, I feel like as long as I've got a snug fit up here, that feels more positioned than the other end where I've got the binding wire on them. And these are out of whack with the binding wire. We're going to try that. See how it goes. It still wants to fight. It still wants to torque. But I'm eager to get over to the torch and see what I can do with what I got. So, as per our usual John Cogswell request, we're doing hard solder. Get the things I pulled out of them, they go out of the way. All right. How's my camera set up? Are you guys able to hear me when I'm over in this corner? That was the other concern I had.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Usual fluxing all the way around. And I actually feel like this end without the binding wire is my best positioned one of the lot. Let's start with that. And I'm going to do hard solder. Starting this way, looking at you guys. And am I zoomed in well enough? Let me see if I can get a little closer for you guys. Is that good? Or a little closer?
Can you go a little bit closer?
Hmm.
There.
We're good? Okay.
Yeah.
As long as I don't rotate too badly, then we should be okay. Need my goggles. Boy, I move a few things around. I can't find anything.
Serves you right for cleaning up.
Right? Get the board out of the way. But the part of the benefit of it is it means I can get my kiln set up at some point, which I've been looking forward to. Yep. All right. It's weird being in a different spot than usual. Okay, I'm using my #1 torch tip on this. Start up of the day, so it's gonna be a moment. And I'm gonna be heating it up just a bit to get my flux dry. And then I'm gonna pick solder on some flux. Again, I'm using hard, right now I'm using chip solder just because I have it already sitting here. But my picks, once again, are grubby. Just gonna put a bit at one end on a couple of the prongs. And I'm gonna remember that the burning smell is the wax that we put on the end, melting off. And once I've got a couple of them packed down, I'm gonna flip. Just one more flip. Can't squeeze a second time on that one. Second way. That's the other downside. The binding wire means you can't rotate this fully. So it's kind of in the way. I'm just trying to get my solder right at the wire and then get it to run down the tube. There's one that's soldered. Don't mind the burning stuff. It also, the binding wire is just in the way, frankly. I'm gonna have a hard time positioning my solder. Get that one out from the binding wire. I might do away with the binding wire on this practice, and the challenge being, if you don't have a really tight fit on where you drilled your holes in the first place, it'll become problematic. Yeah, that binding wire is trying to steal all the heat. So I either need to go find much thinner binding wire or do away with it. That's my verdict. Yeah, the binding wire is definitely getting too much in the way. I gotta pause and clear the binding wire. Especially if you are using it though, remember that you never wanna toss that binding wire in the pickle. Because nobody likes copper coating everything. And that's what it will do. Well, I'm gonna get those two out of the way, the two pieces of binding wire, and I'm gonna go back and straighten my sections so that they fit a little better. Or we're back to being lined up where they should be. I really like the concept of this making multiples at a time. I'm less excited about the practice on this particular setting. Reflux that, try soldering it back again. Not all the way. Work. So what I'm ending up doing is when they do try to run away from where they belong, I'm just encouraging the prongs downward with the tweezers. A little bit better. All right, you need pretty, gang, but they're soldered. So I think my vote is presently no binding wire if you can get it snug enough. But they're sloppy, boy. I'm not thrilled with that soldering job. So I'm gonna pickle this and see what we get after it cleans up a little bit. And then we will snip them off and see whether it's worth all that production to get a few at a time. And your mileage may vary. Maybe you'll be faster at it or you'll find some shortcuts that work for you, but that was some crazy stuff. That's a lot of work to get a few settings when we've already learned that we can do them with the good tweezers and stuff like that. So there may be faster ways to accomplish the same thing. Questions on what we just did there? Yeah, and as a reminder, if you're finding they're torquing too much, soldering down that little slice of tubing to the end just gives it a little bit of a runner. I might even go so far as to drill channel lines up the tubing to sort of make sure that my wires start up straight to give it a little more directionality, I guess. Any questions on that one?
I wanted to ask you, I kept on trying to find it, look at when you were firing the piece, but basically the tube that you used in the beginning to solder on the bottom of the base, it was just to guide you, right? But
Yeah,
it's
so
the
and again,
same
that's not what
size.
John is. John's not recommending that in his. He's doing it the way that I just did, which was to just have the two ends and run the tubes. I just found that I was getting so much of that twist that you saw me fighting that I took a chunk of the same size tubing it was designed for and soldered it smack dab in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was that size the same size throughout the rest of the tubing that you cut?
It has to be. Yeah. The whole point of it is it literally just makes a column for it to work its way up. And then you just have to be careful not to put any solder on the one that's at either end, because you'll solder it to the wire. And I mean, you got to be careful that you don't put so much solder that it flows to the wire and jams it up and plugs your holes and stuff like that. So it may be that may be why he doesn't do that. I just was having such a hard time. You saw how much I was fighting it as it wants to twist.
Right.
And I've never actually seen John make this mechanism. I would love to see what his hands do to keep it all straight and organized. Because there's got to be something I'm missing that I'm not seeing in the material in the book, that keeps it more stable. Maybe I need to even further work harden my wire than I did, but you know, I did a pretty good job of getting some straightness and spring into that. So
Okay.
I don't know.
And then the tubing was, I marked down here 10 to 12 millimeters. Did I get
But
that
no,
right?
so the square plate that you're putting it on was
Oh,
about
okay.
10 to 12 millimeters per the book. It's going to depend on what size tubing you're doing. So this I did for like one of them I did for a 6 millimeter stone, and one of them I did for a 4 millimeter stone. And so the one I've been working on today is for the 6 millimeters, and we'll see how well it fits those nice, shiny, colorful CZs that I bought for such practices.
Okay, now that
Um,
makes sense. I was trying to like in my head think about how did you
Yeah.
do that? Okay, thank you.
If we were to try doing these with heavy gauge square wire, which is the one thing that really appeals to me potentially about this, like this concept of being able to do a batch at a time, feels like I have a little bit harder time lining up my square prongs on square wire when I'm doing that by hand. Then we still have to cut the seat, which is a little challenging. So I probably would cut my seats, at least rough cut the angles into the top of the square wire, square tubing before I slide them in. So I'd always have a top to each of the pieces already prepped. But I haven't played with that yet. I'm looking forward to that. That I may try if I can find the right combination of square tubing, which is really hard to find in heavy wall, and stones that fit them, which is equally hard to find right now, the little itty bitty squares. But otherwise, not one of my favorite settings in the book so far. We'll see if it becomes magical when I do it a few more times.
3 times.
Um,
3
any other
times,
questions?
right?
Pardon? At least
3
3 times. At least 3 times. Supposed to do something 10,000 hours before you master it. I'm not doing 10,000 hours worth of that particular setting. I can guarantee you that, gang. Any other specific questions on what we just did there? No?
Cool.
Okay. So we have one more setting in this chapter that we're going to do next time. And that is literally taking square wire, cutting it, filing it, and voila, it is a 4-prong setting. So that's going to be a quickie in the cut. It's a little bit harder to get in there and file and sand. He makes mention of some ways to do it that have not yet worked well for me in my practicing of that one. But that is for small faceted stones. We then will shift next session into doing chapter 5, graver settings. And the chapters here go a lot faster because there's only a few settings in each of them. But it's a radical departure from any of the settings that we've done so far. There's not as much connectivity. Like chapters 3 and 4 had some relationship in how the settings work together. This is a complete different direction. They are done in heavy gauge metal. So you're going to want some heavy sheet. You can do it in brass, but it's a lot harder to do it in brass. If you're going to practice and don't want to use silver, I'd probably go with nickel, but I hate nickel. I'd say if you can practice this in silver, because it really just looks that much better and you'll get a feel for what you're doing on a more regular basis. So for all of those settings, we use collectively among them 3 different gravers. We use a round for a lot of them. We use the square or flat graver that we were using when we were doing bright cutting in earlier settings, if we did bright cutting on any of the the tops of our step bezels. And we'll use something that he changes the name of partway through the book, onglet or anglet. It's interchangeable. So don't be freaked out when you start reading onglet and then halfway through the chapter it switches to anglet, and when it says one or the other on your whatever you receive when you order them. And he gave us a range of sizes in the book, but gave us also the recommended, his go-to. And there's such small differences in sizes that I would just say, if you haven't bought any and you want to follow along on this one, buy the 3 that he said, which was the 42, the 52, and I think it's the 4, but I'll double check. That feels wrong. And we're going to try, I'm going to try to teach you the sharpening stuff that he teaches me, but I literally asked John in every one of the classes that I took with him after I started using gravers, can you remind me how to sharpen the graver by hand? And he would show me, and I would have it, and I would have it, and I would have it, and I would lose it. And I would have it, and I would have it, and I would have it, and lose it. It is not fun. I don't have a graver device, a sharpening device, and that might make my life easier because he teaches using your hands. He shows us in the book some of the mechanisms you can use. And modern day gravers are often using power gravers with entire kits of material that are used specifically to sharpen them on the power tools. But it's one of those skills that I feel I really need to just keep getting at, because the very first thing we're doing is a stitch setting in this chapter. And stitches are kind of magical. Like when I first learned them in the context of his stone setting, but you forgot to sharpen them, Deborah? Yeah. Well, we're going to try together. If you want to pull one of yours out and try to sharpen it with alongside me, you need your oil stone and your grinding stone. So the thing about this setting with the little spikes that we create is that the lift that you learn is also a mechanism for holding material together. So the second time I used stitches with John is in trying to get a dome in a lentil form close fitting clasp mechanism, a keyhole clasp mechanism. In order to get your lentil exactly perfectly centered, or else your two halves are out of sync with each other, you put stitches in that create a little barrier that locks it in place. And they're so tiny that you can then file them away in your final cleanup. But the stitch is a way that you take material from inside where it's going to be hidden and won't scar the metal that people will see, and lift up your stitch. And I'll draw this one because it's super cool. And he doesn't entirely go into this in this book because he doesn't use it as a holder of material. He uses it as a holder of stone. But this act of creating a little stitch that lifts up. And
Change your camera, Rachel.
thank you. Yes. So if we have a sheet of metal and we've made a perfect spot that we want something on because it's critical that our center point be centered, we make a little stitch from here going this way, going this way, going this way, and going this way. And what we're doing is we're pushing and lifting a little scrap of material. We dig it out of here because that's going to be covered in the end, and put a little stitch up at the outside edge, and it becomes a teeny tiny little barrier such that our little domed piece or whatever we're trying to lock in place snaps into place, right? So it's a temporary version of what we're about to do as the first stone setting. This can be done big scale. The stone setting, the stitch setting as a stone setting technique is only good for 4 millimeter and below, and cabochons. These are designed for cabochons. So you want a bunch of pretty well calibrated tiny stones if you're going to practice this one, because the stone setting version is for doing things like putting these all really close together. And we put little stitches up, stitches up, stitches up all around it. But it's only as strong as those little stitches. And if you're trying to hold something bigger, the innate movement in it is going to eventually break these stitches off. But they're great for a temporary positioning. and it locks you in to where you're trying to stay on the material. And then we do our solder and we file off our stitches, trim away all our excess material, and voila, we have a nice domed piece, right? So even though these techniques don't have much in common with what we've learned so far in the book, there's some killer base techniques for the big picture work that we do in metalsmithing. So keep that in mind as you're progressing through this chapter 5 with us. All right. So with that in mind, our first exercise in preparation for 5 is going to be sizing our gravers. This was another thing that I wish I had learned earlier, because I was fighting along with whatever was in the studio at whatever length somebody had put them in, and a lot of people will go, oh, look, there's a handle, I'm just going to plop this in. In truth, most gravers are too long for us, for most hands, unless you've got ginormous hands. And so the sizing exercise to make them just right for you is an important one. And we're going to skip ahead to page. Let's actually be on page 129 if you're following along in the book. And he does talk a little bit about handles. This was kind of an aha thing for me, because not only had I never thought about sizing my gravers to fit me, but I had never really thought about the fact that they might wear down. Like, that's how I don't use my gravers enough to think about them getting shorter. But of course, if you're grinding them down to polish them, eventually they're going to get shorter and shorter. So yes, he has the practicing the stitch work of the stitch setting on the front cover, inside cover of the book, if anybody's looking for what we're going to do first. But the idea that there are these different sizes is such that you can move from a shorter to a longer handle as your graver gets smaller, so that you're still in proportion to what's the right size for you. So you're not gripping a tiny, it's not like the last crayon in the box, tiny little thing left over. So if you do go shopping for graver heads, get yourself a few different of the lengths to go along with it. Oops, did I miss another chat message? I think I'm good on the chat messages. Yep, I'm caught up. Okay. Let's see. So I have some mushroom head ones. Did I get my longest one? I did not get my longest one. And the other thing is that a lot of times you'll find the round ones. You can just grind down a side. The flat part is kind of important, because if you have a even though the round one may feel more comfortable overall, you put this down and your bench is slightly angled, it's going to roll off and stab you in the foot. So have a little flat surface cut into part of it. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be enough to keep it from rolling. And I just took them on my bench grinder and ground them down, but you could go against sandpaper, rough sandpaper or whatever, and just clean up the edges so it's not going to spike you. The other thing that is the single most important thing about the graver handle, there's a whole lot of wooden handles out there. If it doesn't have the metal wrapper, it's not a graver handle. He mentions that later in the chapter, but that's super critical. If you get one and it's loose, toss a little bit of epoxy underneath it, because what happens is we're putting so much pressure against these at times that it's possible for the wood to split. And if you don't have the metal wrapper around it, it can split and go through the back of your palm, right? But if it's got the metal edging there that is going to block the rest of the tang from coming through, that's what you want. So if it doesn't have that, don't use it as a graver handle. Okay. Questions so far? All right. The other thing that is common in this is that while we're going to be grinding down our gravers to reshape them a little bit, it's very, very easy to lose the temper on the steel. I'm not going to go over retempering. He has a good chunk of how to retemper. There's a particular art form to learning the color spectrum that goes into a temper on steel, and it's dependent on the type of steel you're working with as well as to what temperatures hit it. There's lots of great videos and stuff about tempering. Just keep in mind that annealing and tempering and so on in steel is almost the dead opposite behavior of what we do in working with silver to get it to anneal it. So only if you have to, but try to avoid having to re-temper your material. Basically, if it gets overheated, you need to do it, and you'll see it in the color spectrum. That said, we're all going to grab a pencil or a pen, depending on what you have handy. And the measurement that we're going for is being able to hold it in our fingers while it's tucked into the soft of our palm, right? So where your fingers are meeting, that's the length that we want our graver to be, our whole graver, handle and all. That's the important part. We're not talking about the blade length. We're talking about the end to end, because when I'm using the graver, this is what's sitting in there, and I need to be able to hold the point on the graver up there. Okay, so we're using this as a starting point to our measurement. And that's it. You may want to err a little bit on the side of smaller if you like to crunch your hand. Like I tend to be very grippy on my pencils and stuff, so I tend to get up close. But this will give you, you don't want it longer than this. If you give it shorter, it's just going to be a little, you're going to be holding it a little more crunched. So once I have that mark, I'm going to just put a Sharpie mark where that is on my high-tech measuring pen. So I'm going to go to that mark that I've made on it. And we're going to take a scrap of paper and draw this out. So we are now on page, we are on the bottom of page 130. And what we're doing is taking our total measurement, which in my case is from the start of the pen to that mark I just made. That's the total length I'm going for from handle through. Oops, I gotta pick the one that I was gonna work on. This is the 42. No, I wanted to do one of the rounds. There is my 52. There we go. Okay, so I'm doing the round because that's the first graver we're going to use in the chapter, and I'm not going to demo each one because it's the same behavior. But you'll notice that this is a lot longer. So I can take it out of its precious bag at this point. You'll notice that at present, it's a few inches longer. Even if I were to put it all the way in, it's still longer than I want it to be, right? But I'm not actually going to put this that far into the device. What I'm going to be doing is recreating this curvature further down, having snapped off a chunk of it. Okay, so I know that my handle is going to start there, and make sure I'm not skipping any steps. So what John wants to see, and we're looking at the image, the transferring length markings down at the bottom right, is he wants to see us taking off the excess that goes beyond the end of the handle. Okay. And we're giving ourselves 1/4 of an inch from where the tang starts to in the start of the mushroom, basically. So really, I'm going to be cutting off to about here. Not even, that's longer than he wants. So make Sharpies in a darker mark. And sorry, it's 3/4 of an inch. I think I said 1/4 of an inch, but it's this stretch is what we're going to reshape to be the tang. So we're taking off all of this material. Okay, from here and here, and we're leaving a created tang in there. So step one is we're going to get out our handy dandy cutoff wheels, which again, one of those tools that I wish I'd learned about earlier. Where are my cutoff wheels? Do I have one out? I do. What I got. So I'm just going to change this down. I have 2 on this cutting wheel right now to get a double thickness. I'm just going to drop it down to a single one because we don't really want to be grinding that much steel if we don't have to. If you haven't used a cutting wheel, I personally found them pretty scary at first because they can chop through some stuff. They're pretty darn grindy. And they spark a lot when you're working on things, and they will spark when we're cutting the steel. But they are sometimes the only thing that gets you through a particular task really quickly. Otherwise, you're going to be sawing and sawing and sawing and filing and filing and filing. So we are notching right where we want to cut, which I'm going to clean this up enough so that I can actually see my marks properly. Good. A little bit higher. And I'm just going to put a notch across here. I'm not trying to cut all the way through. I am simply trying to make a clean break point that will be the weak spot when I go to do exactly what I did on the end of that cutting burr a moment ago. I'm just going to snap it off with a hammer, protecting it with a towel so that it doesn't go flying all over the place and hit me in particular. And eye protection is a good call when you're using a grinding wheel in particular. Not that it's not a good call every time we're using our flex shafts, but this is the good start. No sparks today. Okay. Not nearly far enough through though. And if you feel your steel getting hot, stop and put it in some water. Okay, so I'm doing that. I've got it cut about a third of the way, halfway through. Let me give us a definitive how far he wants it. He just says cut a notch. He doesn't say how far. Again, we're going to go put it over in the towel in the block, in the vise, making sure that it's point side down. And we need to actually put it far enough in that all that is showing above the vise. Come here, little towel. We want the line that we just dug in to be right at the vise point. Really wish I knew where my vise jaws were. So I'm lining up that point that we expect it to snap at right at the top edge of my jaws. Covering it up with the towel so it doesn't go flying. And take a couple swipes, especially because you can't see it. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay, it will be a little sharp. And now we're going to go back and use a crappy file. It's my crappy file. And you're going to want to do this not over your silver filings. So I usually just put a little bit of paper down. And you may want to put some tape on your blade, just so that you're not risking cutting yourself up. Really, only the ends of it are super, super sharp, but it doesn't hurt to give yourself a little extra coverage. This is super neat, isn't it? There we go. Just so that I have something I can grip. But I'm going to clean up my hang from the sharp cut that I just, sharp snap line that I just put in there. And then the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna grind this down. Now you have two choices for the grind down, depending on what tools you have. If you have a polishing wheel that you can also put a grinding wheel on, you can pop it over there, or you can use a grinding wheel in your flex shaft if you don't have a true bench grinder, right? Either one will do the trick. Again, our mission is to create this curve that repeats what we were having in there before, because we need a bit of a tang to punch into the hole on the ends. So I'm gonna, just because I don't have a bench grinder set up right now and I have no idea where mine is, I'm gonna do this with the grinding wheel. It is a little easier to overheat without realizing it when you're working on the small wheel, which I find a little ironic because the big wheel is taking so much material off, but I guess maybe the big wheel is taking it off faster. So it, I don't know, friction, man, it should be the same. It's taking off the same material. And you're going to want to have some water to quench this periodically so that it does not get out of temper. A little container for water. Question? Did I hear somebody start to ask something? I'm going to go to goggles just so I have a little more protection because steel will be flying. And I'm just going to work this down the line. Checking for heat. I'd recommend using a mask for this. I'm getting stuff all over me, holding my breath a bit. Getting there. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Take a bit of the chaff that's on there off. I can find my grubby file. There is the, oh, there we go. So it doesn't have to be a perfect match to the shape it was before, but you want similar proportions. I could probably, yeah, I should probably take the front edge down a little bit tangier because that's what's going to be sticking into the end of the wood. This does go a lot faster on the grinding wheel. Just again, be careful of the, oh, strong file. Careful of the overheating. Okay, so I've now got back to approximately the curve I had from the original. It's just a little shorter. And this total, let me get my steel dust and stuff out of the way before I go further and forget. This total, once it's in the handle, is going to fit my proportions pretty nicely, right? So next up is putting it into the handle. And for that, we have to drill a hole. There is a small hole in most handles when you get them, but you need to get a deeper, you need to widen it or else it's just not going to grip. And what does he recommend for a bit size? So he's recommending that.
1/8.
Pardon?
1/8.
1/8. Thank you. So I got to pull out my full scale drill bits and see if I have a 1/8. And he's also recommending that we tape it to give ourselves a stopping point. Oh, I even have a 1/8 inch bit. How handy. Okay, so he's suggesting we put a bit of blue tape or whatever you've got handy at the 3/4 inch mark, because what you don't want is to drill too deeply into the handle, because again, you don't want it coming out the other side at your hand. We just want it in there enough to hold snugly. Come here, little tape. Tape and measuring device. 3/4 of an inch, you say. Okay, help us not go too far in. You'll see that wore down my heatless wheel, which heatless is what the wheel is, not what it does to material. Just because it has heatless in the name does not mean it won't heat up your metal. Friction is still a thing. How are we doing on time? Good on time. Okay. So if you have a drill press, you can do it with the drill press. Otherwise, just go for it. Right down the middle. Watching your blue tape line. And we're good. Okay, so I've now got this, and I've got my well-trimmed tang, which you can see sort of tucks in there but doesn't go very far. Now I'm going to head over to the vise, and I am going to very gently with a mallet tap this into place. So let me switch cameras to the magical vise area. Doing this the right direction. I am doing this the right direction. Really need to find those vise clamps. And again, we just need it snug enough to hold. Not be snug enough. Maybe too low. We're just trying to get it down far enough that we're at basically where the curve of the tang starts. There we go. And voila. Oh, I forgot to position it at the exact perfect angle. It doesn't actually matter for holding, but for the niceness of the positioning when it falls onto the flat side, there's a specific angle that makes it a little easier to deal with. I forgot to line those up. I've got to get my tape off. Yeah, I may have overdone it with the tape, gang. Don't let me wrap your Christmas presents. Okay, so I now have a much better sized for me. I probably could have gone a little shorter even on this. It's a fairly long handle, but that's going to get me the angle that I need to get in a gouge. If I wanted to, no, I'm right to my tang. I could have trimmed this back a little bit further than I did. But that's now going to give me the ability to do my cuts. And now I need to deal with polishing and grinding it. You're grinding it and then polishing it to get it to be a nice, perfect smooth. Don't use your gravers if they aren't well sharpened. They are more dangerous to you if they're under sharp than if they're really sharp. And if you want to know the way to know that a graver is truly sharp, if you scrape it on your thumbnail, it should catch. Okay, and I don't mean like catch a little bit. I mean like it should be able to take, it gets caught in the material. The last thing you ever do when you do a polish is you tap it into the wood just to take any extra burrs that are off on it, and then you check it on your nail. And this is like not at all polished right now, not at all sharpened. Okay, so that's putting the handles on. Boom, one done. Any questions on that, gang? Okie doke. And we are going to grab the stuff that we were just working on out of the pickle. Take a look at it. Where is my, oh, my pickle is on the opposite side from my water bowl now. That's the change. That's the big change. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, here is our magical, ugly, multi-part jig doing its thing. I'm not sure how happy I am with this one, but let's cut them apart and see what we got. So let's see.
Can you change your camera?
I'm sorry, I thought I'd hit the button. There we go. That's the right one. Yep. I'm just snipping, rough snip. Pull it out of the grips. Actually, just snip them on either side and pull it out later. So there's one setting. Yeah, I think I'm going to go this way on these. Two settings. Three settings. Well, I would say that one of these, well, maybe, yeah, one of these is really well laid out. And two of them are a little wonky. Let me trim it back a little further and see if it looks as bad when it's trimmed to more prongy height. So there's definitely an appeal to being able to cut a bunch of these out at once. Like it's satisfying to do a bunch in a row when you're getting to trim them back out. But I'm still not sold on value to return on this jig concept. Let's see, let me pop some stones in there, what it looks like. Really stick ones. Yep. Let's get it positioned right. So it feels like a bit of a parlor trick to me more than an actual like super useful setup. But I don't know. I think I'll try this a few more times at different sizes and see if I find any magic that makes it speed up and more effective. So with this particular ratio, I'd probably do a smidge of a cut into the seats. Although they rest just fine, I guess, as they are. They just feels like they need a little more stability than they're getting just resting on the surface. Trim the prongs way down and fold them over. Oh, my screen is really dim for you guys today. Let's see if I can get that a little brighter. There we go. What are your thoughts, gang?
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. But I mean, the plus side is I now have this size jig. Like I've made it, I can now just reuse and reuse it. The whole point of a jig is the reuse thing. But yeah,
Can we see it a little more close up?
sure. Let me bring it over to the other camera
Thank you.
and the jig and my variation on the jig. Over to the super camera. Oop, which bench? That bench. See if I can get some light on this too. So this is the jig we need today, and this is my version with the doodad.
That's great. Thanks.
Whoop, too close. That doing it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, conceptually, if I can get better about straightening out the wires and stuff and figure out either a much finer binding wire, like 26 gauge binding wire, if I can find it. Maybe if I can get good at making, 6 settings, 10 settings at a time using these jigs, I'll like it better.
I like it.
So
I mean,
again,
I think it's cool. I mean, it's pretty cool. Do you have to like drill in to create a seat, or is
So
that the
on-
way?
that's what I was saying. On these, I probably would do a smidge bit of drill in because they're so resting on the top that like they're a little wiggly. Even if I were to put the prongs well onto them, I think they'd want to move. So for these, I would just do the slightest drilling down. Or if your stone is just big as the tubing, you need to do a little bit of drilling in. But in theory, you can do them just resting on the top if you've got a good match of tubing to stone. And again, even though John doesn't talk about these being eligible for cabochons, if your cab fits perfectly at the size of the tubing you've got, there's no reason you couldn't put a small cab and just make sure your prongs stay long enough to go up over the cab, enough to hold them. So that's that, gang. Any questions on this or any of the things we covered today? Like suddenly it feels like we're flying because we're ready for chapter 5.
I have one question. I guess I missed it. Why did you cut the drill bit to begin with?
Because
Before you
so
make-
I do that on really fine drill bits, because if you think about it, there's a rotation point in your drill that the longer you have sticking out of the drill, the more it's likely to distort and get like bend a little bit and stuff. If you've got it trimmed nice and close, there's less likelihood that you're going to introduce that wobble. So I wouldn't do that on a big drill bit. I only do it on the tiny thin ones to give myself a little more stability. One of the parlor tricks that John does that I wish I could emulate. He makes a drill bit out of a broken off piece of saw blade. So you take, if you've broken a saw blade and you take that end that doesn't have the teeth on it and you snap off that portion and then file an angle, it's like a slight angle on one side and flat, and then you put just the barest bit of it sticking out of your flex shaft, it will act, it's good steel, it will act as a teeny tiny drill bit, and it's just the right size for your saw blade to go through afterwards. So if you're doing really delicate pierce work, it is the best size of hole for any pierce work you're about to do. It's kind of magic and I cannot recreate it no matter what I do. So there's that. Yeah, so all we're doing is giving more control over the bit. Any other questions from today? All right, my favorite time has come. I want show and tell, gang. I want to see those card settings that you guys were sending me photos of and anything else that you have been doing. If I can get myself out of, there's my little screen. There we go. So remove spotlight. Who's got stuff to show? Anyone? Oh, please, gang. You're killing me. Nobody's got stuff this time, huh? Okay, you got something? What do you got, Carmen? Let me pin you. Where's my pin? Spotlight for everyone. There we go. What do you got? Woohoo! Holy cow. You have been busy.
Yeah.
Nice.
This one was the first one,
Yep.
and it was really hard.
Yeah.
And I haven't soldered it, as you can see the ball. I mean, that's the stone, the circle just fell off.
Yeah.
Once I got the hang of it, this one was easier.
Yeah.
me.
That's not surprising. Nice. Oh, those are going to look fantastic. Are you going to set those on a ring too, or are you going to do something else with them?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I can make it into a ring.
So you could, I mean, you could set it corner to corner. You could make a wide band ring and put it on there. You might have to put a little curvature filed into the base of it, but it's a very pokey design for a ring. Like it'll catch on a lot of stuff. So unless you could also frame it. I mean, like you could set it down into like a walled top of some kind with a heavy bezel wall or something. That'll give a little protection from catching, but it's definitely a cocktail ring style, if anything, not a everyday wear kind of thing. But cool. I'm so excited. A few of you sent me stuff saying you were jumping on the card setting. And for me, it's one of those ones that I'm always in awe of how interesting it is by comparison to everyday settings.
Yeah.
So I was very excited to have gotten really into this one. Any other demos or show and tells? Anyone? Okay. It's a new year, new studio time, new frame of reference. All right, gang, let's call it then. And our next session will be February 1st, at which point we will do the final setting in chapter 4, the square wire one, which is relatively quick, but also a lot of filing. And I'll probably clean up these little settings from the multi-jig and we'll set those. And we will go straight into graver settings. So I think even if we do the square prong setting, I think we'll probably get to the first setting. But maybe we'll just do our prep work for it. So there's a couple of test plates that we're going to want to make for the stitch setting. We want a heavy gauge sheet and nothing else, but for the settings beyond it, where we're starting to do beading and stuff, it's a lot easier if you make a T that I think I showed you. I can't remember on one of the settings we were looking at earlier. I showed you where you just solder on a cross section that you can use and grip in a vise or in a ball vise, ideally, or something like that. So when we get to the star setting and the false gypsy and things like that, those are all a lot easier if you've got them snug, or you put your plate in a big chunk of jet set or something like that. And you're going to want, for those, you're going to want to do them on a good sized chunk of material, and you're going to want to make batches of them, because it's really interesting to see your progress from the first time you do. A lot of people call it a flush setting. John calls it the false gypsy. There's one setting, I may be getting ahead of myself. That might be chapter 6 that we're getting into that. There's one setting where I'm going to have to make a wax carving and send it out for casting. And what I wanted to know is, do you guys want to see me making the wax? It's going to be a pretty basic ring. Do you want to watch that process? I'm seeing one yes for sure. Okay. All right. So I'll do that on screen when we get to that section of it. But then what we'll have to do is I'll make the wax, send it out for a couple castings. Meanwhile, we'll go on to the other settings, and then we'll come back when it comes back from casting, because I don't do any of my own casting. So we'll go from there. So that's that. And yeah, you're going to want your 3 gravers by the time we're into this chapter. You're going to want a good set of setting burrs. And you're going to want to make a tiny pin burnisher fairly soon after. And if you guys would like me to make one of those on camera, I can. You can make one from a dead drill bit, a dead burr. You don't want to use the drill bits. So I can make one of those on camera. It's grinding and filing and polishing and not much else. And for my personal favorite, there's all kinds of tools and handles you can use, but my personal favorite thus far for when we get to that kind of setting is one of these basic, I think they're like $12 pin vices that you can pop your thing in and out. Other people like something more like a graver handle. This one is, for whatever reason, is just the right size for me to do good flush setting or false gypsy. I gotta call it false gypsy while I was here. I hate that term. So I'm going to avoid it as much as I can, probably. But those are some of the tools you'll want to prep in readiness for the next chapter and a half chapter, 2 chapters. And then we're almost done. Then we get to a couple of funky ones. I think we have 3 chapters left. Is that right? This is gravers, then flush settings in chapter 6. No, gypsy and flush mount in chapter 6. And then we go to the weird, we got pearls and unusual settings. 7. Yeah, not much left, gang. I'm betting we'll be done somewhere towards the end of summer at the rate we're going. Have a lovely evening. Enjoy. Thank you as always for your company.
Thank you, Rachel.
And I'll
Thank
see you in a
you.
couple weeks. Bye.
Thank you.
Great class. I like that piece. It reminded me of a sculpture when you were binding it together and all of that.
Oh, you like the templates? Well, I'm going to
Yeah.
challenge you. Once you've done your first, try doing one with 6 prongs. Show us how it works. Because I
see.
kind of like 6 prongs, I think makes it worth it to make one of those rigs and do them in batches. All right, gang. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.